So obviously it's the first day back for Parliament, MPs going back to school basically, and obviously Keir Starmer, it's the beginning of his second year at Westminster. So I think for number 10 Downing Street today, it was all about sort of showing a little bit of a reset moment. Now we were expecting a full-blown reshuffle. I'm told that's not going to happen now until probably next week. But he has announced a sort of mini reshuffle of his Downing Street operation. Some of the names that you might have heard of, someone called Darren Jones, he's Chief Secretary to the Treasury. So he will be now going directly into number 10 to serve as his basically Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister. He will still be attending Cabinet, we're told. But that is quite a move. It's Rachel Reeves's number 2. And I think it's kind of shows to me two things. Firstly, that the current number 10 operation, at least there are people in Downing Street that think that it hasn't actually worked that well for the last year. It's obviously, if it had been working, then I'm sure they wouldn't have made any moves at all. So there's that. But secondly, I think it shows just how much this government are going to really be putting on the economy in terms of a focus going forward. And we know that Rachel Reeves has got a really tricky budget later this year, and that's going to really form a key part, I think, of this government sort of narrative going forward. So we've got actually from number 10 Downing Street today 3 points that they're focusing on. So one of those things is growth that people can feel in their pockets. The second thing, secure borders, and the third, fixing the NHS. And actually, not going to trump my own trumpet too much, Sheila, but two of those things are absolutely things that I've been banging on to people in number 10 for ages, that these are just really simple ideas, really simple priorities that everybody sees that they want to see that change in society on. And if you focus on some of these things and focus really zoning in on actually improving people's lives in ways that they can see for the better, then I think that they've got a chance of actually holding on to power at the next election.
And just a very quick word on Darren Jones, for people who don't know him. He was the chair of the Business Select Committee, wasn't he, before he became Chief Secretary of the Treasury in government. Is that significant that his background is in those two areas ahead of that budget that you mentioned?
Of course it is. And he very successfully led the Treasury's infrastructure review, the 10-year strategy that the government sort of launched over the summer, with actually sort of how the government are going to invest and where that money is going to land. And that was seen, I think, by some people in government as quite a successful strategy. He's also a very good media performer. We have him on LBC all the time. And it's fair to say that I think he talks in a way that's very accessible to people. I think he answers questions quite well. And I don't think he comes across as just another slippery politician. I think he's quite good with a narrative, and that I'm sure is a part of Downing Street's reason too.
I had a conversation with him about being the father of girls during the Taylor Swift mania that he was fully engaged in. So you're right, he does speak human, as they say in politics. Let's get on to this polling then, this exclusive polling for LBC. What did it show?
So we've been working with 5654 and Company and Merlin Strategy, who have done some exclusive polling, which we've seen today. And I think really it sort of ties into this conversation that we're having about Keir Starmer's, sort of reset and where the country goes next. Now, about a year ago, after Keir Starmer came into Downing Street, he gave this very gloomy speech in the Downing Street Rose Garden where he was talking about how basically Britain is broken. And actually 2 in 3 Brits think today that Britain is broken and needs radical action to fix it. And most of those people believe that the cost of living is still the number one priority for the government to fix. And again, it just shows as we go into this budget, that is going to be a real key priority for the government to get right. And it is going to be really tricky. Rachel Reeves, according to some economists, needs to find £40 billion worth of savings somewhere. So that's going to be really tricky for her to do. At the same time, this polling is showing that 51% of Brits still believe that taxes are, specifically income taxes, are too high. So how are the government going to square this circle? It's obviously very difficult to fix all these problems. The government can't do it all in one go. But I think what number 10 Downing Street are trying to say with this strategy, with this sort of reset moment today, as we go into conference, they are trying to set out a little bit more about the narrative, what we will hear from the government on the domestic agenda. I think it's fair to say that Keir Starmer has focused a lot on the international agenda. He's obviously had, the US, Ukraine, the Middle East, lots of problems and things that he's very much focused his attention on. But actually, in order to win an election, you of course need to focus on those domestic priorities. And I think that number 10 Downing Street are trying very much to give this big bang moment ahead of the party conference, ahead as well of Reform's party conference, which is starting later this week, trying to get on the front foot. And the announcements that we've got this week, the 30 hours of free childcare, and some of those narratives very much focused on putting more money into people's pockets, making them feel off. Somehow, however, Labour MPs that I've been speaking to over the summer, Sheila, just want the government to go more radical, go further, go faster. So I think Sir Keir Starmer will be under a lot of pressure to set a bit more of that out at the party conference.
And I read that Darren Jones is one such person in government that wants not just people who you've polled, but Darren Jones is deemed to be a sort of quiet radical there as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's fair to say that, Darren Jones at one point was probably on the sort of centre-right of the party. But equally, I think he also had, like I say, a lot of ideas. And he wanted to see, I think, the government, when he was not in government, that is, he wanted to see the Labour Party take a few bigger steps. So I think, his background as the Business Select Committee chair, good media performer and somebody who's not afraid to speak his mind will go well in government.
And can I ask you as well, in the polling, as well as people clearly saying, look, just make life less tough, please, cost of living stuff. What about other issues? Because as I understand it, asylum, which we're going to be talking about at 3, came much lower in the list than those practical day-to-day concerns about health, kids' education and costs.
Yeah, I think it was something like number 3 or 4, and it was still fairly high in terms of the amount of people who see it as a priority, but it just wasn't seen as the top priority. Now, obviously, this is just one poll, and if you look at the YouGov tracker, we've talked about this before, migration is topping that as an issue. It just goes to show that, obviously, what comes first, the sort of chicken or the egg situation? Is it because the media, we've got protests, we've got, images of small boats crossing the channel over the summer? Is that heightening the number of people who are concerned about it, or is it the other way around? It's kind of hard to sort of see which comes first. I think it's fair to say that the government, and you've seen that in what they've said of their 3 domestic priorities, including secure borders today, this will absolutely be something that Keir Starmer is very much determined to focus on. We'll be hearing a bit more from the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, in the next couple of hours, talking about the one in, one out deal, talking about Article 8 and Article 3, which I spoke with you about last month, about tightening up the criteria for judges to essentially be able to use the ECHR without actually leaving it. And that's another issue that Keir Starmer, I'm sure, is going to face pressure on, especially as Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch basically say the same.
And when the Home Secretary speaks later in the Commons about families' rights when somebody is given asylum here, so that the rest of their family's rights, is that part? Are we going to hear that essentially? Are we going to hear her essentially say, we don't need to leave the EHCR in order to be tougher here? We can do it with our own rules and our own laws that exist already.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you remember that sort of chicken nugget case that we were talking about earlier this year, which obviously got, lots of people's backs up and made a lot of anger there, that was actually a case of a UK judge, not a European judge that was putting forward some sort of, foreign diktat on us. That was our judges. And Yvette Cooper has been looking at Article 3 and Article 8 of the ECHR and looking about how she can essentially change the law. And Number 10 Downing Street confirmed this lunchtime. That is exactly what the Prime Minister wants to do. That's what the Home Secretary wants to do. Change the law to make it harder for people to use those. And in terms of what she's going to make it harder in terms of bringing your family, if you are an asylum seeker, you get accepted into this country, you will have higher language requirements, being able to speak English and other such sort of barriers to make sure that people aren't just coming here, claiming asylum and bringing an extortionate number of family members with them too.